U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that he is reimposing tariffs on Canadian aluminum.
Reimposing aluminum tariffs on Canada. Canada was taking advantage of us, as usual.
We lost tremendous amounts of money.
50% tariffs against aluminum, 50% tariffs against steel. We will continue to fight against all these unjustified tariffs.
The United States has the world's largest military and one of the largest manufacturing bases on Earth. But right now, it produces less than 1% of its own primary aluminum. In 2025, the Trump administration placed a 25% tariff on Canadian aluminum to fix that problem.
The White House announced 2 new tariff changes. One order focused on metal imports. The new tariffs on steel, aluminum, and copper have really 2 goals from this administration. One, they're trying to crack down on companies that are trying to evade existing tariffs by lowering the cost before a product is imported and then increasing the cost that U.S. consumers are asked to pay. Secondly, they're also trying to make it easier to calculate whether tariffs are due for products that are only partially made of the metals. So on raw materials, the tariff rate will be 50%. But for products that only include some metal, the tariffs could range from 0 to 25%, depending on how much steel, aluminum, or copper is in the finished product and depending on where the finished product is coming from.
Instead, American manufacturers are paying more, domestic capacity is still shrinking, and Canada has found new buyers. It may never give up. The stated goal was national security. Washington argued that depending on a foreign country for a material used in fighter jets, cars, and buildings was a strategic vulnerability that needed to be corrected.
We are in this trade war for now a year. There's 25% tariffs against our auto sector, 50% tariffs against aluminum, 50% tariffs against steel. And we will continue to fight against all these unjustified tariffs.
Canada is the single largest supplier of aluminum to the United States, responsible for roughly 60% of all American aluminum imports.
I don't think it's great reporting that we saw today. If anything is done, I think it would be sort of clarification on some incidental objects. But again, that's going to be the president's decision.
The expectation in Washington was that higher tariffs would make Canadian metal expensive enough to force American companies to invest in domestic production. Canada did not hold angry press conferences. There were no immediate retaliatory tariffs. Instead, Canadian aluminum producers did something far quieter, and the consequences of that decision are still rippling through the American economy today.
Different markets, and we're seeing that in the auto sector as well. Like Ford's earnings last week were dismal. So it's a situation where tariffs don't always work.
But the real story is just beginning. Before the tariff escalation, Canada was sending approximately 9 billion Canadian dollars worth of aluminum into the United States every single year. That was not a secondary trade flow. It was one of the largest single commodity transfers between the two countries.
Lost tremendous amounts of money.
The industries that depend on that aluminum employ over 6 million American workers, auto workers, aerospace engineers, construction crews, and defense contractors. The primary aluminum smelting industry that the tariff was designed to protect employs fewer than 7,000 people in total. On top of the 25% tariff, American buyers began facing something analysts described as a double price shock.
This is the second time in the last 2 years that Trump has hit Canada with import tariffs on aluminum.
As Canadian producers redirected volume away from the US market, supply inside the country tightened. That meant American companies were not just paying the tariff premium, they were also competing for whatever supply remained, pushing base prices higher at the same time. Building a new domestic smelter requires 3 to 5 years and between $2 and $4 billion in capital, making a rapid fix structurally impossible. And this is where the situation becomes more complicated. The US aluminum industry did not collapse overnight. Through the 1980s and 1990s, American smelters began shutting down one by one. The reason was simple. Canada, particularly the province of Quebec, sits on some of the largest hydroelectric power sources on Earth. Running an aluminum smelter requires enormous amounts of electricity. Canadian producers could generate that power cheaply and cleanly. American producers, paying standard industrial grid rates, simply could not compete on cost.
It's that vision of a new industrial era that we're putting into place today.
By the time free trade agreements locked in duty, free aluminum flows across the border, American manufacturers had built their entire supply chains around Canadian feedstock. There was no backup plan because there had never been a reason to need one. This is also not the first time Washington has tried this. The Trump administration placed the same 25% tariff under Section 232 in 2018. Not a single major new American smelter was built in response. The cost of this policy is not abstract. It is landing directly inside American factories and federal budgets. Ford and General Motors are already under pressure to fund their transition to electric vehicles. Electric vehicles require significantly more aluminum than traditional cars. The tariff is hitting at the exact moment these companies can least afford a raw material cost increase. Defense contractors building fighter jet airframes, naval vessels, and missile components are absorbing higher aluminum alloy costs on every contract. That burden does not disappear. It transfers directly onto the Pentagon's procurement budget, which means American taxpayers are covering the difference. Smaller manufacturers, the Tier 2 and Tier 3 suppliers that feed the large automakers and aerospace companies, do not have the financial tools to hedge against sustained input price increases. Many are operating on margins where a prolonged cost spike means layoffs, delayed contracts, or shutting down entirely. Federal infrastructure projects are also running over budget. Roads, bridges, and public buildings all require aluminum. Higher input costs mean less infrastructure gets built for the same amount of money. But something else is happening behind the scenes. While Washington was focused on pressuring Canada, Canada was using the tariff window to do something Washington did not anticipate. Canadian aluminum producers began locking in long-term supply contracts with European automakers and Japanese aerospace companies. These buyers were actively seeking low-carbon aluminum made with hydroelectric power. Quebec smelters were exactly what they needed. Those contracts are now signed, and they will not expire just because Washington changes its mind. This is where the long-term consequences become difficult to ignore. The tariff was built on one core assumption, that Canada needed the American market badly enough that economic pressure would force a renegotiation on Washington's terms. That assumption was wrong. Canada did not need to win a trade fight. It only needed to find other buyers, and a global economy increasingly focused on carbon emissions handed Canada exactly that opportunity. For Prime Minister Mark Carney's government, this outcome is a significant political advantage. Canada absorbed the pressure, diversified its customer base, and emerged with a stronger position in global aluminum markets, all without firing a single retaliatory shot that could have been used to frame Canada as the aggressor in the dispute. The deeper problem for the United States is structural. Decades of trade integration created supply chain dependencies that cannot be reversed on a political timeline. Tariffs function as leverage when the other side needs your market more than you need their product. That condition does not hold for Canadian aluminum. The US needs it. Canada now has other options. Quebec's smelting operations at Jonquière and Bécancour are reportedly expanding, not to serve the American market, but to serve Europe. That means the gap between what the US needs and what Canada is willing to send south is likely to grow wider over time, not close. The United States set out to protect its aluminum industry. Instead, it accelerated Canada's shift toward global markets and may have permanently reduced the volume of Canadian aluminum available to American buyers, even if the tariffs are eventually lifted. The 6 million workers in aluminum-consuming industries are paying a hidden cost to protect fewer than 7,000 smelting jobs that did not meaningfully grow. The question that remains open is this: if a future crisis cuts off supply entirely, what does American manufacturing do when there is simply nothing left to buy?